Welcome to those of us who are joining us by Zoom as well. Oh, I want you to picture as we start out this morning that you're in a very dark room. Maybe it's your bedroom in the morning before the sun has come up. Maybe you're just kind of in a dark building and all of a sudden the lights flip on suddenly. If any of you have small children, sometimes this happens unexpectedly. The lights all of a sudden flip on, or you're in that dimly lit room and you walk out into the bright afternoon sunlight. What's your reaction? You squint, right? You close your eyes. It hurts. It usually hurts first. That light is too bright. It's too much. And so we might shield our eyes. We might turn away until we start to let our eyes adjust. Or maybe you flip off that light as fast as you can. But often, as we allow our eyes to adjust to the light, and thankfully they do, right? Thankfully our eyes begin to adjust, and then we're grateful for the light, right? You're grateful for that light that you can navigate your room better. If you've ever tried to navigate your room in the dark, it can be hazardous, right? Or you might grab the wrong pair of socks or two different socks, right? If you're navigating in the dark, or if you're navigating outside in the dark, it's much harder. The light helps us to see, helps us guide our way. But I want you to think about that confusion and that moment where you kind of squint your eyes when you initially encounter that bright light in a dark place, as we journey into our text this morning, and as we look at Jesus' own claim that he is indeed the light of the world. We're going to be looking at kind of touching on several chapters of text today in John. We're going to be looking a little bit at John, beginning in John chapter 7 to set the scene. We're going to move into chapter 8 where he makes the claim itself that he is the light of the world. And then we're going to journey into chapter 9 where he demonstrates who he is when he gives sight to a blind man. So we're going to cover a lot of text. Obviously, we won't work through it verse by verse, but we're going to look at these different sections. And we're going to see that as Jesus continues to reveal his identity, right, there's at first that confusion. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of wondering, and there's a lot of controversy about who Jesus is. We're also going to see the beauty of the light, of who Jesus is, that he's that light. And we're going to look at the responses to that light as people encounter him. So we're going to look some at that confusion. We're going to look some at Jesus himself, what he says, and then the responses to him. And I think as we look at the text and we look at how others are responding to Jesus, there's an invitation to us also to see this light, to see Christ, to respond, and to testify to the light that we've encountered. So we're going to lay it out in three basic parts. We're going to first think about as the light comes. So we're going to look a little bit at the big stage for Jesus' statement that he's the light of the world. So think of the dawn coming up. We're going to set the scene a bit. Then we're going to look at his actual statement, what he says about himself, the light being revealed. And then we're going to look at those responses to the light. So we've got three parts that we're going to walk through. If you have your Bibles, you could open to John chapter 7. I'm just going to make some observations on this chapter. We're not reading through it. But this sets the scene for Jesus' statement that he's the light of the world. Notice that when we start out in John 7, he's actually up in Galilee. And there are three key components that I want you to notice if you were to read through the chapter, which you can do. There's a lot of conflict about who Jesus is. There's a lot of confusion. And this is all going to take place. It's all going to come to kind of a key moment at the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles. And we'll talk a little bit more about the significance of that. But notice that if you're looking in John 7, the Jewish leaders, he's up in Galilee because the Jewish leaders down in Judea, where Jerusalem is, were looking for a way to kill him. There's a lot of conflict going on if they're looking for a way already to kill Jesus. It tells us in John 7 that the Feast of Tabernacles is drawing near. And his brothers say, let's all go down. Show your signs to the disciples there. Show who you are. They still are trying to figure out what to think about Jesus, his own brothers. And Jesus says, it's not yet his time. So they leave, and then he, at his father's leading, goes down secretly right to the festival. So he doesn't go down publicly at first. So let's read now. If you have John 7, you can turn to verse 11. Now at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking, "Where is he?" Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, "He is a good man." Others replied, "No, he deceives the people." But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. Do you hear the confusion around who Jesus is? Is he a good man? Is he deceiving us all? Do you sense the conflict? The people fear the leaders, so won't say anything. The leaders fear Jesus, and so they're seeking to do away with him. This is an intense moment and time. And all of this is going to take place, this is all happening as people from all over the Jewish people from Judea and Galilee and from all over the region are gathering together at the Feast of Tabernacles. So the Feast of Tabernacles, just as a little bit of an aside, is the fall feast at the harvest time, after the harvest. So after you harvest the grapes, and like you'd have olive harvest and pomegranates and all those sorts of things, it's the fall harvest. This feast occurs typically in September or October, depending, it's based on a lunar calendar. And it's a very joyous festival. It lasts 8 days. There's 7 days of celebration, and then an 8th day of really big celebration. And so you've got an 8-day feast, lots of joy, lots of festivity. Think Thanksgiving for 8 days with a lot of celebration. And it recalled God's provision for the people in their wilderness wandering. So it remembered they built booths. It's the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, because it remembered their wilderness journeys when they lived and God provided to sustain them in the wilderness in tents, right? So it's remembering God's redemptive activity and his provision. And so there are 2 key things about that provision, of course. One would be the water that he supplied, and the other would be the guidance, the leading that he supplied in the cloud and in the fire. So the cloud by day and the fire by night. So light and water were a big part of this festival. And as I said, it was very popular. It became known as the feast because everyone knew that this was one everyone wanted to go to. And it's really celebratory. There's water and light. And it also began to be linked, of course, with hopes that God would come again, that he would deliver and redeem his people once again. And so some of the prophetic passages that tie on the themes of God coming, that also have images of God supplying water and God supplying continuing light, are a big part of this festival. And so Zechariah 14, just going to read a little bit from verse 5 and through verse 9, because it pulls together the themes and the hopes of the people at this time. And in Zechariah, it says, "Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. On that day there will be neither sunlight nor cold, frosty darkness. It will be a unique day, a day known only to the Lord, with no distinction between day and night. When evening comes, there will be light. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half of it to the east to the Dead Sea, and half of it to the west to the Mediterranean Sea. In summer and in winter, the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day, there will be one Lord, and his name, the only name." So there's a lot of hope. There's a hope for God coming, for that living water, for that light. And everyone's celebrating this. And halfway through that feast, Jesus begins to teach publicly. That's what we find out in chapter 7. He arrives kind of anonymously, and then somewhere halfway through, maybe day 4, he starts to actually get up and teach in the temple courts. And chapter 7 then follows with a whole series of questions and debates and division over Jesus' identity. Who is this guy that's starting to teach? They want to know, where did he get his training? What authority is he speaking with? Where did he come from? Where is he going? And that'll all play out in chapter 7. And Jesus keeps telling them, "I came from the one who sent me. I came from the one who sent me. I'm going to the one who sent me. And I learned from the one who sent me." So he keeps pointing them back to God the Father in heaven. and they still remain really confused. But on the last day of the festival, so that eighth day, Jesus is going to make two really big claims. First, if you look in chapter 7, verse 37, he says, "Let anyone who is thirsty," right, think of those streams of living water Zechariah talks about. "If anyone who is thirsty, come to me and drink." He identifies himself as the source of living water. And thus, the debate about Jesus' identity heats up. What was simmering when Jesus arrived is now, I would say, at a roiling boil, right? Jesus is getting everybody's attention. And we're going to see that some see Jesus as the prophet, some see Jesus as the Messiah, and still others still want to seize him and get rid of him. And then in 8:12, we're still on this last day, likely we're still on this last day of the feast, and we should understand that Jesus is speaking again in this location after claiming to be the source of living water, the place of thirst quenching. He's going to make another claim, the one that we're going to focus in on here. And he says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So in his second I am statement, we looked the other week at bread, Jesus asserts that he is in fact the light of the world. And his statement here, like what he was doing in chapter 7, launches him into a whole nother series of debates. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more next week when we look at his next I am statement. But what I want you to see here is that when we look at this bigger setting, notice that Jesus, when he declares himself about being the light of the world, he is not afraid of the controversy that his identity brings. He's not afraid of the controversy or the confusion that his own identity brings to the people. In fact, rather than toning things down, Jesus seems to go in the opposite direction, making continuing claims about his divine identity. He continues to articulate to the people who he truly is, and he invites them to consider and decide how to respond to that reality. He isn't forcing people, right? He doesn't force them. He's not shrinking back either from the questions. I would say, obviously, Jesus is comfortable enough in his own skin, if you want to use very colloquial language, in his own identity, in his Father's love, and in the mission that he is sent on, that he can stand calmly in the midst of this conflict and in the midst of this confusion about who he is, and he speaks truth. He speaks truth as God leads him in these places. So I just want to draw out just a point of significance just as we look at the setting of what's going on. And I think you can probably agree with me, if you think about conversation today, or controversial conversation, you always steer clear of two things, right? You steer clear of religion and politics, right? If we don't want to get into controversial conversation around, a Thanksgiving extended family dinner table, let's steer clear of those two things. But I think Jesus, as he invites us to consider who he is, he challenges us that we can speak truth in our settings, right? As God leads us, we can speak truth and point to who he is. So I would just say that as the Spirit of God prompts you in conversations, right? We're always listening to kind of how the Spirit of God prompts us. But be willing to articulate in words who Jesus is, who you know him to be. This might make people uncomfortable, but that is okay. It is not the worst thing in the world to be made uncomfortable. It can feel that way. I hate making people uncomfortable. I'm preaching to myself, right? I like things to be at peace. I like everyone to feel comfortable. But sometimes the reality is that discomfort created by truth spoken in love, God can do really good things with that, right? He can do really good things with discomfort when it comes from truth spoken in love. This week, in fact, I came away from a conversation. It wasn't with anyone here. It wasn't with anyone at work. But I was in a conversation, and I left, and I realized I think I'm kind of agitated. And then I thought, I think I'm actually angry, which is a good thing to realize, right? I'm actually a little bit angry. And I began to think why. And what I came to see was I think that this person had spoken truth into my life in a very loving way, in a very kind way, but it was still speaking truth. And I don't think I wanted to hear it or quite believe it. But as I let myself sit with the truth, God began to work and do good things with it. And I think that's the reality, right? That we have to be willing at times, when the Spirit prompts us, to speak truth, to speak to who Jesus is in our lives, to other people. It's moving past that embarrassment, I think, as Doreen was talking about sometimes, to say, hey, God is nudging me here to say something. And I think as Mennonites, right, we are deeply ingrained to allow our actions to speak. And we do that really, really well. We love in so many tangible and beautiful ways. But I think as we do that, Jesus, I think, reminds us here that at his leading, to add words to those actions. Let us be willing to invite others to consider who Jesus is by speaking about him. Jesus was willing to speak. He demonstrated all the time who he was. But he then put words to those actions. He then said who he was. He made claims about himself. So just an encouragement to be willing also to put words to the actions that we do. Allow those words to speak. And so as we think about speaking about Jesus, let's think about who he actually is, the identity claim that he makes of himself when he says, I am the light of the world. Like his previous statement about being the bread of life, and as he mentions that it's not quite an I am statement, but it's very close. He says, that he's living water, the source of living water. Jesus' self-identification as light is really deeply ingrained and rooted in the Old Testament. I say that about everything, right? But no. And it connects vividly with what's taking place around him, with the festival of the Feast of Tabernacles. So interestingly, you picture you're in Jerusalem, there's Herod, there's the temple's beautiful, there's this big temple platform. And on the last day, during the festival, they think possibly on the last day, the Mishnah, which is Jewish rabbinic writings, describes the light ceremony during this festival. And it says that in the women's courtyard, so not the courtyard right in front of the temple, but the next one out, there were what they would do during this festival, they would set up four huge golden candelabras, each that had 4 basins made of gold. So you've got these big bowls of gold sitting on these big, candlesticks. And each of those bowls held 75 gallons of oil. So that's a lot of oil. And so you have 16 bowls on 4 candlesticks, and they say that they use the worn-out garments of the priests for the wicks. And using ladders, these young priests in training would go up, they'd fill these bowls, and then they'd light all these wicks. So you have these 16 bowls with probably multiple wicks coming out, set up in the courtyard. And it said that it would illuminate all of Jerusalem. The temple's fairly high, and so you've got this burning bonfire, right, coming out from the temple. You've got the limestone walls, and so everything's illuminated in light. And this light, the light that they would light at the Feast of Tabernacles, represented the pillar of fire that would go with them, that went with them at night as they journeyed through the wilderness. So it represented God's presence, that fire by night, the cloud by day that would lift from the tabernacle and lead the people. It was his presence, it was his guidance. And in the Old Testament, God himself is spoken of as light. It says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? God's wisdom is compared to light. God's word is compared to the light to our feet, right? So we've got presence, we've got guidance, wisdom, and word. All these are associated with light in the Old Testament. And furthermore, when Israel's prophets speak of God's return to rescue his people and bring justice and peace to the earth, there's this image that the light will always shine and never go out, like Zechariah talks about. There's no more night. And so listen to the words of Isaiah as he pictures God's return and the restoration that comes with that. He says, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. No longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin or destruction within your borders. But you will call your walls salvation, and your gates praise. The sun will be no more, be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you, for the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun will never set again, and your moon will wane no more. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end. So hear these words. These are the words that are ringing in the background of the minds of the people, right? The images of God's guidance, the promises of everlasting light. And now picture Jesus standing on that last night of the festival under these burning candelabras, representing God's guiding presence and his wisdom and his hope and his salvation. And then hear him declare, I am the light of the world. Does it cause you to pause for a moment? Here, a 30-something-year-old Jewish carpenter turned itinerant rabbi from a backwater town up in Galilee with, a semi-questionable group of disciples, standing at the center of the Jewish religious life on one of its most joyous and celebratory days, saying, I'm the light. I'm the light. He's God's presence. He's their salvation. He's their hope and their guidance and their wisdom. He's the light. And he says, come and follow me, right? So that you might not live in darkness. These are big claims. This is no small claim. He's saying he's the very presence of God standing among them, bringing them salvation, hope, and guidance, right? Jesus' words in John continue to remind us that life without Jesus, right, is a life that's actually lived in darkness. We have a lot of light around us. We have a lot of light around us physically all the time. But Jesus says that without him, that's not true light. And so his words invite us. They invite us, I think, whether we're considering for the very first time Jesus, or even if we've walked with Jesus for 60-some years, I think that when we choose to trust and follow him, we come into the light, right? He says, I will reorient you, right? He gives us a picture of what life is really about, what really matters. We begin to see differently. And what strikes me is that as we walk with Jesus, that even as we grow physically older, and a lot of times our eyesight begins to dim, possibly, our spiritual eyesight can continue to grow ever sharper, right? That even though our physical eyesight might dim, as we walk with Jesus, I think his light grows brighter, and our spiritual eyesight can grow even sharper as we begin to see more like him. We begin to see more what he sees and notice more what he notices. So how do we think about allowing our spiritual eyesight to continue to grow? So these are just some questions on just a very day-to-day level, right? Oftentimes at home, when we'll light a candle at dinner, and when we light it, we'll just say, Jesus is the light. And you can just remind yourselves, right, that Jesus, you are the light. And whatever situation you're about to walk into, you can say, shine on this situation, right? Let me see truth, right? Because Jesus is all about truth. Let me see this person as you see them, right? Jesus sees that person. Can I see them as he sees them? Lord, let me see myself as you see me, right? Am I seeing myself right? Because as we begin to see what's going on, our situations more clearly in light of Jesus, others more clearly in light of Jesus, ourselves more clearly in light of Jesus, isn't our eyesight growing sharper? Isn't our light, isn't his light giving us better vision for each day? So, just a question, are there situations in our lives where you would like to see Jesus' light shine a little more clearly, a little more brightly? As I was preparing the sermon the other day, something was really on my mind, and I thought, as I was thinking about it, it distracted me, right? And I thought, okay, I have a couple of choices, right? I can I mean, obviously, I'm telling it to you a little more rationally than I thought through it the other day, but I was like, I can just try to ignore this and keep trying to plow through with my sermon prep, right? And that's like my usual response, like, I'm fine, keep going. Um, I could distract myself with something else. Another easy response, right? Like, let's check whatever, Facebook, let's check something else, right? I could distract myself and see if it goes away. Or I thought I could actually reach out to somebody and tell them, hey, I'm kind of distracted by this, would you help me think about it? And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. And I eventually, and trust me, I don't always do this, but it took me a long time to finally reach out. I thought, okay, I can text this person, you know, they can, like, we could have a conversation. It took me a long time to decide to do that, but it was really good. I eventually actually did. And then, you know, we talked for 10 minutes. That helped me kind of think about it, stopped my mind from spinning over it, and I was able to move on. But it's just a simple way that I think Jesus helped me to see a situation more clearly, right? Let his light shine just a little bit more on that, right? Instead of just pushing something aside that's bothering you or upsetting you, right? Instead of just trying to distract yourself, what does it look like to ask for help or to address it or to reach out to someone that is there with you? Like, we are a community together, right? We can support one another and reach out to each other. This is God's light shining. We become his presence in other people's lives. And so just an encouragement that I think one of the ways that our vision grows sharper is as we just stand and support one another, as we're there for each other, as we ask God to help us see situations more in the way that he is seeing them and more in the way that he sees those around us and ourselves. These are just, I think, everyday ways that his light can shine and we can have better, sharper, clearer vision. And Jesus is going to illustrate, the last section that I want to look at, is that Jesus is going to illustrate for us how he brings light, and that his light, just like on a small scale, can bring kind of restoration to something that's running around in your mind. Jesus' light is going to bring restoration to a blind man, a man born blind. But it is also, at the same time as it shines, it is going to cause others to turn away from that light. And so you can think of, like, when that light switch flips on, there are people who, we're going to see a journey of one man who is drawn to it and transformed by the light. We're going to see the image of others who are going to shield their eyes and shield themselves from that light. This all takes place in chapter 9 of John's Gospel and is very closely linked to his statement that he's the light. There are several themes that predominate in the chapter, including blindness, right, connected to sight. There's the issue of sin, the violation of God's laws, and who is in sin. And then, of course, there's the topic of sight itself. And if you read through chapter 9, which we won't do just for time's sake, but there's two journeys that Jesus takes us on. There's the first, the journey of the man who is seen by Jesus and taken from physical blindness that he was born with all the way to physical sight and to true spiritual sight. And the second involves the group of Jewish leaders, religious leaders, the Pharisees, who see the work of Jesus, but go on a journey from physical sight to ever-deepening spiritual blindness. So just some observations about each of these two journeys, and then we'll wrap things up a little bit. But let's look at journey 1. We have a man born blind. He's a blind beggar as a result of his condition. It's presumed that either he or his parents have sinned, were in gross violation of God's ways, and so he has this physical affliction. I always think of this story because I was born with glaucoma. Had I been born probably 30, 40 years earlier, I probably would have also been blind. My eye pressure was for like 40 and 50 when I was born. So always just kind of think of that as I think of this story. But this man, right, so he's born blind. He's assumed that there's great sin in his life or his family's life. He has to beg for his living. So he's on the margins of the margins, right? He's destitute, he's dependent, and he must carry a lot of shame. Now look at what the text says. Jesus saw him. Jesus saw him. And Jesus declares that he must do the work of God, for he is what? The light of the world. And so what's he going to do? But he's going to spit in the dirt. He's going to put mud on the guy's eyes. And then he's going to tell him to go do something. He's going to say, go and wash. And then notice what the text says in verse 7. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. He went, he washed, and he came home seeing. His first step, he trusted, right? He trusted this man who put mud on his eyes. I think he was probably hearing Jesus as he was talking to his disciples. And he said, this man didn't sin, his parents didn't sin, but I'm the light of the world and my works are going to be seen here. He trusted and he followed the words of Jesus. And now he could see. Next, the story keeps going. It doesn't end there. It doesn't end with his sight. In the second step, he's going to testify truly to the work of Jesus, even under duress. This launches again a huge controversy because he was healed on the Sabbath. And he's going to say, he's just going to give his testimony. I was blind, but now I see. I was blind, but now I see. And then he further declares that they say, the religious leaders are saying, this man can't be of God. He can't be from God. He's working on the Sabbath. And he says, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And so he declares that this man is in fact from God. And this results, the blind man, who can now see, gets rejected by the Jewish leadership. And then Jesus is going to encounter him one more time. And in that last time, in the last verses of chapter 9, he's going to reveal to him his true identity. And what does the man do? But he believes and he worships in verses 37 and 38. So he goes from destitute and blind to seeing, to testifying, to worshiping, and knowing who Jesus is. He has taken on a journey from physical blindness to true, real spiritual sight. He can now see. Not only does he can see the one who saved him and the one who redeems him, and he will tell others about that. But in our second journey with the Pharisees, some of the Pharisees, they're given increasing knowledge. They witness this work and the identity. They see Jesus, the identity of the light, but they are going to move further and further away in their rejection. Look at what some of the Pharisees determine. They're going to say, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. So they conclude that this man is a sinner, Jesus being the one they're talking about. Why? Why do the Pharisees cling to this law on Sabbath, right? They are so mad that Jesus has worked on the Sabbath that they think he's a sinner for this. And I'm extrapolating here a bit. But I think in their careful, meticulous systems of laws, they found a lot of clarity and they found a lot of safety. They knew what they needed to do and they could do it. They could point to their law keeping and they could point to their Sabbath keeping, which is chief and prominent among those laws, and declare, I'm a good follower of Yahweh, I'm part of the covenant community. But what they missed, right, in their careful, meticulous keeping, what they missed in all their legal scrupulousness was what their covenant was all about. And that's that it was about a relationship with God, about a relationship with Yahweh. We were listening in our Sunday school this morning how Jen Wilkin, who was the video series we were listening to, she talked about how God freed them from slavery to bring them to himself. They were brought out of slavery to a person. The law that God gives was the law to structure and guide a redeemed community into a life of redemptive living in God's presence. But they had built such a tight theological system, right? Such a tight set of laws and laws around the laws that it lacked all of a relational center. They lost the relationship in their system. And so that when the center showed up, right, when the relationship showed up, when the light showed up, they closed their eyes to it. They couldn't see it anymore. And so that's what the work of the light just showed the spiritual blindness that was there and drove them further away because they'd lost the heart of what their whole system was to be about. And they had built laws around laws. So what can we learn from a man who goes from the margins, from blindness to true spiritual sight, and from those who think they have such clear sight, who think they have such clear understanding, but wind up being ever darker in their understanding? Let's begin actually with the Pharisees' journey. What I think it shows us, and it's sobering to me, is that we can witness the restorative work of Jesus, and even Jesus himself, but not understand what we see. That's a reality. When our theological grids fail to have a relational center, I think we're in danger of such things. Our theological systems have to have Jesus, God, at the center of them, a true relationship, right? I love systems, right? I think it's really important to know what we think and why we think and all those sorts of things. But we have to have the center. They could not see their own need, nor could they see the one who could meet that need. They'd lost sight of who they really were, their own neediness. They lost sight of the way that that need could be met in Jesus. Where the blind man who went on a journey of restoration, he knew his need, and so he was open to Jesus' words. He was humble, so he was willing to listen and to follow Jesus' instructions. He knew his need. He knew who he was. He was open, he followed, and he was changed. He was willing to both testify then and to worship to Jesus. So do we know our need, right? Are we willing to allow Jesus to assess us, to allow the light to expose us, so that, not just so it can just put us on display, right? But so that the light can transform us. The light transformed the man with his needs and his brokenness. And so it's just an invitation, right? There's several invitations, from that invitation to testify to who Jesus is, the invitation to just look at the light, and then to allow that light to show us what we need to in the right and good ways, to expose us, so that Jesus can continue to transform us. So I just want to close with a prayer, and this just about letting the light of Christ come into our lives. So I'll close with these words. Light exposes. Jesus, expose all that needs to come into the light of your good presence. Expose the beautiful that I fail to see. Jesus, expose the wounds that I need to see. Jesus, expose my waywardness that I might turn more fully towards you. Jesus, expose the brokenness that needs your healing. Jesus, expose my longings that only you can satisfy. Jesus, be my light, be our light. Amen.